Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 30th of June, 2024. Great to have you here. Steve, thanks for the happy Canada Day weekend wishes, and hope everyone in the Northern Hemisphere is staying cool enough these days, and great to have you here with us. All right, let's jump on over to our agenda, and we'll take a look at what we're going to cover today. As always, this is a workshop that goes along with our courses at school.learnlightandsound.com. But we didn't have any questions, which is great news. That means I'm going to assume everybody has what they need and are off and working on projects, making some great sounds, so that's good news. We did launch a new course, a free course on how to choose gear for your live stream. It's sort of a mini course. It's about 25 minutes long and just gives you some perspective on when you're choosing gear for your live stream. And that includes the video switcher, the camera, the microphone, maybe you need a mixer, maybe you don't, depending on what you're doing. So we kind of run through some of those things. So if that's of interest to you, you'll find that over at school.learnlightandsound.com as well. All right. I wanted to cover a topic that's come up to me a number of times, and that is people that are, generally independent video people that are working maybe with maybe freelancing or maybe working very small production companies. A lot of times they're very focused on the camera and the video aspects, the visual elements of the production, and a lot of times they don't necessarily understand the audio part of the production. And so I just wanted to cover some things that could be really helpful to kind of get everyone up to speed on how to if you're in a situation where you're working with a new camera or you're working with a new recorder mixer or anything like that, that to just kind of give some vocabulary and some reasoning behind things are set up the way they're set up for audio. And we'll actually take a look here at our Allen and Heath SQ5 as to kind of give some of that context for today. And then we did not have any questions that were submitted ahead of time, so we'll jump over to the chat when we're done with that. But for now, let's go back and take a look at a couple of things. I want to just kind of touch on this a little bit, and I think it's fantastic. I'm not trying to point fingers at video or camera people and saying you don't know audio, blah blah blah. It's not that at all. It's actually, let's talk about audio so that you're empowered, you understand some of the fundamentals, and you're in a better place to either record the audio yourself or to work with a production sound mixer when you're working on your next production. And I think the reason that some of them struggle with recording sound is they just really haven't had the training. They don't understand some of the fundamental concepts. No one's ever really taught them some of those basic things. Let me give you one example. If you're a camera person, a very common question I think for these people to ask is, well, what's the difference between level or gain or trim or fader? How are all those different, or how are they the same? Are some of them the same? And that's a little bit mysterious because different manufacturers use different words for those things. So, for example, if we go ahead and cut to our overhead here, where this is our Allen and Heath SQ5, it's pretty small, but up here at the top, we have our preamp, and right underneath it says gain. All right, now if you go over to a Sound Devices Mix Pre, and you go into the menu, you will see that it says gain. If you go to a Sound Devices 833, 888, or a Scorpio, in the menu it says trim. And then, of course, if you go to a Zoom H4n, it says input or level. I can't remember if it's level or input. It's one of those two. I think it's level, actually. It says level. So this can get really confusing for people really quickly. And I just want to run through some of these things really quickly. So let's go back over to our slides here. And here we go. So let's kind of talk through these first. For practical purposes, gain and trim are generally the same thing. And what this refers to is this is the amplification that's applied to a microphone signal to boost it up to roughly line level. And it's really a foundational step for recording or mixing. So whether you're doing live sound reinforcement, whether you are recording a show that is live and then you're going to also post-process it, or if you're recording and you're just going to do post-processing, maybe it's a short film, maybe it's a corporate video. So in all those cases, you're obviously recording. But in all of those cases, This is that amplification that's applied to the microphone signal. And here's the reason. Microphones output a very weak signal. And so what this first gain stage does is it boosts that level up to line level. Now, if we go back over to the SQ5, let me just give you a context there. The SQ5, let's go ahead and switch to that overhead. You could use this in a recording situation. And in fact, there are some production sound mixers for film and television that are using this mixer. They have pretty big carts to be able to accommodate it. It's a fairly large mixer. I have an enormous hand, and here's just an example, maybe something that's a little bit easier to reference. Here's a set of headphones. It's not exactly something you throw on a mini cart, but you could put it on a large cart, and some production sound mixers do. But typically, this kind of mixer is used at a live show for especially music performances, but any sort of live show where there's a stage, someone performing on stage, or addressing an audience on stage. You could also see it maybe in broadcast. I think there are other mixers they typically use there, but you could see this there as well. It's a pretty good fit, but I think the thing that's most interesting here is that if we look at this, and actually let me switch over to this. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my mic. Danny, I'll leave it on the overhead here. Okay, so now I'm on this other mic here. So here's something interesting. If I want to set the gain, say, for input number 1, I select that input. We come over to the processing page, and here is where I can change the gain level, or the gain right here. If I want to change the gain for channel 2, I have to press this button, and now this knob becomes the gain trim or gain knob for that particular channel. And the same thing with the third channel. So that this is the channel I'm on right now, channel 3. And we've got our Earthworks SR314. So there's only one, basically. This is a digital mixer, granted. Now, if you were working on an analog mixer, there would be a gain knob for every single channel. But on a digital mixer, there's just one. And they've actually put a lot of thought into the ergonomics of these. And here's my point that I'm trying to make. Notice down here, every channel has a fader. But all of the channels in this particular mixer and a lot of digital mixers now have to share the same preamp or the same gain knob. So what does that mean in practical terms? That means that the way this board is set up, they're not anticipating that you're going to be changing the gain a lot. It's more of a type of thing that you would do during a sound check or when you're getting prepped. It's not something you would necessarily do during the actual performance or during the actual recording. In those cases, you would be adjusting the faders. So the question is, that begs the question, and I'm switching back to my other mic here. So that begs the question, what's the difference between gain and trim? And let me just kind of go back over to the slides really quickly here. So usually, gain is not something that you adjust a whole lot during a recording or during a performance. You can. There's no hard and fast rule saying you cannot. And in fact, if you find that a performer during sound check was, projecting at a certain level, and then you get them into the show and suddenly they have 10 times more energy and they're projecting a lot more, you're probably going to have to go in and change their gain level a little bit. However, that's, generally the idea is that you have that all sorted out ahead of time so that once they're up on stage, you're not going to have to do that. Instead, you're going to use the fader. And what does a fader do? So if we cut back over to the board again really quickly, these are the faders right here. These are our linear faders. You can also have faders that are knobs. They're usually called either fader pots or knobs, sometimes people call them, but they can be a rotary type thing instead of a linear thing. But linear is actually what you'll typically see on the boards where someone's really actively mixing during a show or during a recording, because you can actually operate multiple of them at the same time with different fingers. And in fact, if you're ever curious to see what that looks like, I would highly recommend you go over to Audio Buff's YouTube channel and take a look, especially at one of the, he's done this a couple of years now, if I'm not mistaken, Audio Buff, where you record the Christmas program. And you can see the kind of the behind the scenes where he's actually actively mixing during the performance. And you can see how he's able to lay his hands out across a bunch of different faders and adjust them in real time during the performance. Okay, so back to the slides here. So what is a fader? What is it actually doing? Isn't it just like another way to control the volume of your channel? Well, that kind of. So what a fader is actually doing is it's a control, whether it's a linear fader or a rotary knob or whatever, potentiometer, pot, sometimes called. This defines the level at which a particular channel is sent to a bus or to the final mix. Okay, so that particular, it's a way to say, okay, for this channel, this is, say, my microphone right here, I want to send it at this level over to the mix. And I might want to send more of it if I'm a quieter talker than the other person in the interview, maybe. Or if I want to, while Danny's talking, and Danny can talk if I pull her fader up.
Hi, everyone. This is Danny. Hope you're having a great day.
So when Danny's talking, I might obviously pull my fader down so we don't get as much microphone bleed if I don't have an auto mixer. But that's kind of the idea of manually mixing. So there are lots of different scenarios where you may want to adjust things. So this is used when you're making a mix to even out differences between mics or instruments, deciding which sources are most prominent or which you want to be most prominent or most forward in the mix. So if you think of it in the context of music, sometimes you may need to push the vocals up a little bit more. You may want them to be a little bit more prominent, at least during part of the song. Maybe the part where, I don't know, it's an artistic decision at some level. So there are lots of different reasons. So a fader is not adjusting the amplification level. It's adjusting how much of that channel is being sent over to the mix and being included in that mix. You could also do it to a bus. And buses are probably beyond the scope of what we're really going to dive into here today, but a bus is basically a way to, you can do a lot of different things with buses, but the bus is another term where you send audio. It's another place where you can send audio for different purposes, either to group it together and make a separate mix. So for example, actually, let me give you an example so that it's very clear. If I have a live show that we're also recording, what I might do is there are a variety of ways to do this, but one example is I might have a different mix. I might want a different mix for the recorded show than I want for the live show. And the reason for that is when you're doing live sound, there are a whole additional set of considerations you have to take into account. You have to make sure you're not getting any feedback. So if, one mic is too hot and you're getting too much signal from the loudspeakers bouncing back and getting into the mic, and then it starts feeding back and making that horrible screeching noise, you have to take care of that. And the way you take care of that often, a couple of different ways. Number one, you either EQ that particular microphone input channel so that it's not going to pick up this frequency that tends to be feeding back, or you may apply some sort of time differential. You can do that as well. But you don't necessarily want those, especially the EQ, getting into the mix for recording because it might sound really weird. It will sound good in the room because the room has all this sound coming out of the loudspeakers and it's bouncing around and interacting with the reality of that room, all the physics involved there. But in a recorded version, it might sound really, really odd because you're not getting all that interaction with the loudspeakers putting sound into the room and making it sound the way the room is making it sound. So a lot of different things going on there. So you might use a bus to maybe pre-fader send all of the things maybe to an auxiliary bus before there's any processing applied so that the recording will be clean and clear of all of that special EQ or anything else you're doing to manage the live show. Okay, so that's the difference between gain and fader. Let's take a pause there. Any items in the chat, any questions in the chat that we need to address yet? Danny, I just want to make sure everyone's really, really clear on that. Curtis is finally talking about equipment I use. Makes me happy. Of course, Audio Buff. This is very, very core to what you're doing here. Of course, Matt as well. Yeah. Pros set the gain during sound check. The gain is set so that if I take the fader to max, it doesn't feedback or redline. Exactly. That's another really great point that Matt brings up here is that you want to be able to use that full range on the fader so that during the show you can push things up. If you need to push the fader forward, and usually you can add an additional 10 dB or so to an individual channel. If you need to push that up, you want to make sure that it's not going to be clipping or saturating on that particular channel. So being able to use that entire range. You definitely want a separate mix for the live versus recording. Exactly right. So very different experiences there as well. Just like a school bus moves people, an audio bus lets you move many channels of audio to one location. That's a great way to think about it. Thank you so much. In fact, I would like to go ahead and turn the rest of this session over to Audio Buff and Matt Ruff. We didn't actually arrange that today, but this is kind of core to that live sound reinforcement. Robert asks, please discuss the change in level, gain, volume when more channels are added to a mix. I was just getting to that. So
we haven't.
Danny has a question. Go ahead.
No, I need to just ask you.
Okay.
We have an unrelated question. Do you want to save that till a
Yeah,
later date? Okay.
we'll come back to that.
I mean, a later
Yep,
point.
you got it. Okay, question. Wait, so question about levels. Here's the thing. Here I have an experience to tell you about when I was learning how to use a mixing board many years ago. First time, it's an a music festival, an Irish music festival. I'm basically second chair at the mixing board because I was just learning. I've never had done it before on my own, certainly. And it was a stage where we had these different acts rotating through every 30 minutes. So it was pretty hectic. And Danny knows what I'm talking about here. We have, if something happens, there are actually two different stages going at the same time. The primary mixer had to go take care of something over at the other stage. I'm on my own for the next act that comes up. They show up. It's a band with 17 pieces. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. And we had all of the bands and all the acts kind of submit stage plans beforehand, so we knew how many channels they needed. We knew where they wanted things set up, so on and so forth. I don't think we got that on this one. So I'm running around, we're getting everything set up, and I have never mixed anything like this before. And fortunately, they also had a kind of I don't know if it was a producer or someone with them who knew the band really well and had mixed their music. I think probably worked with them in the recording studio. But anyway, I've got all the faders. I'm going through, I'm setting the gain on each of the inputs, and I have all the faders up at 0 unity. And it was so incredibly loud, and it was feeding back like crazy. And you have to keep, the short version is, when you have that many inputs at the same time, for music in particular, where they're playing at the same time, it sums up. So even if an individual channel is peaking at 0 dBu on your analog meter, and you have headroom that goes up to, plus 18 or whatever, when you have a singer that's hitting 0, and you've got all these other instruments that are also coming in, if you leave them all at 0 unity on the fader, and you've gained them up that way, the overall bus is going to be completely saturated. It's going to be pegged up at the top. So that's where you have to, you're not pushing it the same way you would with dialogue, where generally one, maybe two people are talking at the same time, and maybe there's a little overlap, but for the most part, it's one person. So the moral of that story is it's important to keep some headroom. And when of course, for those of us doing video and primarily recording dialogue or spoken word, you still need to keep some headroom. And so you'll notice here, in fact, if we cut back over to the mixing board again.
Sorry.
Oh, here we go. There we go. You'll notice the meter here. If I do, let's go pre-fader listen. Actually, does that do anything to our sound? Are we okay? Still coming through? Okay, yeah. Notice that the meter goes from minus 48 up to technically to plus 18. And kind of the idea with the target is you want to be around 0 generally. And then in essence, in a live show, you're going to use your master fader over here. The way I've used it, at least, and maybe Audio Buff or Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but generally I've used that as the volume level for the room. So you want a mix that's healthy on the meter, and then you use the master fader to kind of control how loud it is, that whole mix is in the room. So this is what's getting sent over to the power amplifier and then sent through the loudspeakers. And a lot of times I found in live shows, maybe we were just overpowered for the room we were trying to do the sound in, but we weren't near unity very often. We were well down we had lots of headroom, or we left lots of headroom because it was just, I think maybe the power amplifier was a bit more, and the loudspeakers were a bit much for that room. But in any case, those are some things to keep in mind. Okay, any other items in the chat that we need to cover here? All right, Shoji, during a live recording, if you saw the meters on a MixPre 6 going above 0 dB, would you lower the gain or the fader? Which meters? That's the first question, Shoji. Are you talking about the mix meters, or are you talking about channel meters? So if the mix meter is going at 0 dB, then I would turn the faders down. But if the individual channel peak meters are hitting 0 dB, then yeah, you're definitely too hot on that channel and you need to pull it down with gain. And then if all the individual channels are healthy, then you just need to turn the faders down for the channels that are coming in too hot into the overall mix. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, Matt says, my teacher decided to go to the bathroom when the London Philharmonic was doing Beethoven Fifth. Oh my. Baptism by fire in caps. Yeah. I'll use DCAs for a submaster. I leave the master out at 0. Okay, so that's an interesting, different approach. So for those that are not familiar, DCAs are essentially digital... what does it stand for again? So there are VCAs and DCAs. They're another way to essentially make a group and be able to control things at a group level, as opposed to having an individual fader for each input on your sound board. So it gives you essentially a way to control a group in a convenient way. And that's a little bit more advanced audio buff than I wanted to get here, but it's a great point, and I think that's a very, obviously you know what you're doing more than I do when it comes to live sound. So Yanti says, is there any reason to make a stereo mix on a MixPre if you are doing corporate videos, mostly interviews, and say 3 to 4 channels at maximum? Why not use ISO only? Camera does stereo mix. Yeah, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. If simple productions, lower budget productions often don't have a post-production cycle, or a very small one, and it needs to be very inexpensive in those cases. Doing the mix while you're recording, get it sounding as nice as you possibly can, going straight into post, because there's going to be maybe just a minor edit of the video, then that to me makes sense to have a stereo mix and do the best you can with that stereo mix. Here's another example. If you're recording, especially if you're doubling up on mics, so in other words, each person on camera has a lavalier microphone plus a boom microphone, you probably don't want both of those in the stereo mix at the end. So I would make a stereo mix that only includes the mics that you're most likely to use in post. Make that as great as you can, and if it's a good one and there's not a lot that the post team needs to do, they can just use that mix. So those are some of the reasons. If you're going to do a full-blown mix anyway, then yeah, you can just record ISOs if you don't want the stereo mix. That's valid as well. There it is. Digitally controlled attenuation. Thank you, Audio Buff. DCA is a subgroup and a mute group in one package. So it's a great, quick way to be able to control the whole show, or portions of the show independently of each other. Okay, Shoji, on a MixPre, can you simultaneously view pre-fader meters and fader meters at the same time? Good question. I don't know the answer. Let's take a look. I'm going to pull out my MixPre. I don't have the overhead camera set up to do this, but let me take a look here. Well, you can view the mix meters and the isolated channel meters at the same time, certainly. So that's definitely possible, but I don't think there's not really a way to set the meters to you can solo or pre-fade or listen. I mean, in essence, here's a view. Let me just see if the camera will pick this up. if it hides my eyes. Yeah, so here you can see this is a mix pre-3, so it's showing the stereo meters plus the isolated channel meters at the same time. So that's the view you would use, Shoji. That way you know if one of your channels is just coming in too hot and you need to adjust your gain, or if it's just a matter of changing the faders. Hopefully that makes sense. Matt says, for live, I set the master at -5 during sound check. Based on the crowd, will kill buffer some for the live show. So that's another consideration in live that we don't generally have to contend with when we're recording for a post-production process, is that when you're doing a sound check in a venue, there are very few people there. And then when the crowd, the audience arrives, you get a bunch of water bags sitting in this space, and it changes the sound profile of the room. And so what Matt's talking about there is giving himself some headroom there. For when all the people show up. So when the room suddenly changes again. So that's another one of the arts of live sound reproduction, which is why I have the utmost respect for those that mix really, really well for live shows. Let me show you one other thing here too. Let's go back to our overhead camera. I'm going to grab a Sound Devices 888. Okay, at the overhead, I'm going to have to refocus here. If you give me just a second. There we go. It's a moving target. Notice on here, the 888, it's kind of hard to see. It's not lit very well, but we have these tiny little retractable knobs here. Those are the gain, or the trim, as they call them here. And then the big knobs are the faders. And the reason I point that out, that's probably enough to show you there. Get this back in focus. Okay, back over to our main cam here. The reason I point that out is that's another example of the thought that in this case, Sound Devices put into designing. I'm on the wrong mic, sorry. That's another example of the company who designed the 888 and the 833 and the Scorpio, making really intentional ergonomics decisions there. And the idea there is that during the live recording, or during the recording, you're probably going to be adjusting the big knob, which is the fader. And the gain trim is that small retractable knob that once you get it set up, you shouldn't generally have to go back in there and mess with that, but you can if you need to. So that's just another example of understanding the mixing process. There are people, a lot of times when you're first getting started, including myself, if I need to ride the levels, as they say, I can just keep adjusting the gain, can't I? Well, the problem with that, and the reason you generally probably don't want to do that, is that a lot of times the way that those devices apply gain is not perfectly linear. And so the characteristics can change a little bit. So it can be an experience that starts to get a little bit, it starts to sound different if you're riding that. And so it's best to instead ride the fader, where you're just choosing how much of that channel to send to the bus or the mix, as opposed to actually adjusting the gain, which could potentially change the character of the sound as well. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. I think we got it. I think we got everything there. Let's take a pause here and see what questions or comments we have in the chat here. What wisdom the live sound production mixers out there can share with us. Happy to have you share that as well. Thank you so much for being here.
Sorry if I go back to an unrelated question.
Yep. Okay, now we're going to go to an unrelated question. Here we go. What's your opinion on coiled versus straight XLR cables in a boom pole? Well, there are basically three options. Well, there are four options. So internal cables can be straight or coiled, depending on the boom pole that you're using. You can wrap a straight cable around the outside of a boom pole, or you can go wireless. So up until fairly recently, I have a boom pole by K-Tech that has a coiled cable inside. I like it. I didn't get a lot of cable banging around inside. I don't generally have to cue really aggressively, so it wasn't necessarily an issue. but that worked well for me. I think it's a personal thing, to be honest, and it also has to do with how it's implemented. So a lot of times if you were to open those boom poles up, what some of the manufacturers will do at least is they will put essentially a piece of felt, they'll cut a slit in it and put it over the cable, or kind of seat it perpendicular to the cable so that the cable doesn't bang around inside the pole. And that's the big issue with cables inside the pole, is that there's always the potential as you're cueing it back and forth that's going to bang against the wall of the pole and make extra noise and be picked up by your microphone. So I've had pretty good luck with coiled. The problem with coiled cables, though, the way they're implemented typically is that if you're not careful, especially if they're kind of sealed off at both ends, like on my K-Tech pole, if the sections get twisted over time, that cable gets really twisted, and then the pole won't collapse smoothly. So you have to be very careful about that, and it's actually probably a good idea to take the tip off periodically and untangle your cable to make sure that you're not first damaging the cable and also that you're keeping it nice and smooth. So the thing about straight cables is a lot of times the way they're implemented is they're loose at the bottom end, so there's just a slot that they fit through at the bottom end. And so as you extend the pole, it just pulls more cable into the pole itself to accommodate the additional length you're adding to the pole. On the straight cables, I assume that you can also add those kind of felt perpendicular inserts that will help prevent the cable from hitting against the side, but I've never used a straight internal cable, so I'm not familiar with those from firsthand experience. Nowadays, I just use wireless. There's no cable at all, which is nice. The thing with cables, too, is that you can, it's just another thing to manage, because when you're working on a busy set, any cabling can get in the way. And I've found myself, almost stripping or just having to be very, very careful about taking up slack when I don't need the extra slack, and putting out just enough so that I'm not pulling on the cable that's wound up on the outside of the sound bag, so on and so forth. So, I've had good luck with coiled. All right, Shoji, on a mix pre and basic mode, do the front panel knobs adjust gain, trim, or fader? Gain. Gain trim. They call it gain on the mix pre, but yeah, it's gain when you're in basic mode. In advanced mode, it is a fader, and the gain is set in the channel menu instead. And that's just a reflection. Let me just finish a thought off on that. That's just a reflection. So advanced mode is supposed to be set up like a traditional mixer would. Basic mode is for people that are not familiar with audio mixing and want something really, really simple, which is all they know is, okay, I need to amplify the levels so that they hit a peak. And they're almost always told, set it so that the peaks are hitting -12. Well, if you do that and you're recording a 7-piece ensemble, you're going to have a mess on your hands. So that's not necessarily always the best advice. But for recording dialogue, especially for one, maybe two people, I would say this. I would leave more headroom on modern gear like a Mix Pre or a Zoom F3 or F6 or above, because their preamps are pretty clean. So you don't need to push the levels that hard. You can easily leave 18 dB of headroom. And so in other words, adjust the gain so that when a person is talking, the meters are hitting generally max around -18, and then on a dB full scale meter, and then you should be good. You can boost those up in post as necessary. And that gives you plenty of headroom. Especially what happens on unscripted pieces when you have multiple people talking is if they laugh or they start talking over each other, you need that headroom. So that's a reason to do that. All right. Hi, hope you're well. I have a question about the Mix Pre 6.2. I don't really understand what exactly MS decode doing during the recording. Could you please explain? Thank you. MS decode stands for mid-side decoding. So when you're doing a mid-side stereo recording, you're using a cardioid microphone that's pointing presumably at the source of the sound. And then you also have a figure 8 microphone that is perpendicular to that. It's picking up the sides. And so what a mid-side decode does is it takes it so that you can listen to it binaurally on headphones. So it's taking all that information from those two different microphones, one being a figure 8 where it's picking up on both sides, and the other one on the perpendicular axis is a cardioid picking up just from the front. it puts that together into, in essence, a stereo, like a binaural mix, a headphone mix. So that's the idea. That's what it does at a very high level. All right, Yanti, it's a two-part. Okay, when line level wireless systems used on Blackmagic designed pocket camera, the audio level gain on camera is disabled. Why is that? On MixPre, it's enabled. Change gain on transmitter is not. That could be.
It's not that good.
It's not that good compared to a knob. Yeah. Okay. So here's why. When you are switching an input on a recorder or a mixer to line level, there's an expectation that the audio coming in on that will be at a certain level. So you're not needing to re-amplify. You shouldn't generally need to amplify it a whole lot. And then on a MixPre, you can adjust it to some extent, but you will notice, I believe, you cannot amplify it as much as you could if you have it set to microphone level. And let me just confirm that. That's my understanding. On most mixers, that's the case. When you switch to line level, your amplification range is smaller. So let me just take a look here. So if I change the channel 1 to line level, sorry I don't have this in a spot where you can actually see it, I can apply a maximum gain of 30 dB. But when I have it set to microphone level, of course, let's see, mic, I can apply up to 76 dB of gain. So the idea when you're in line level is that audio should be coming in at it should be coming in at the level that is expected for line level. So it's measured in, I believe in voltage. I can't remember for certain, but you shouldn't need to adjust it a whole lot. Now, there's some differences between, different devices, and there's professional line level, which is plus 4 dBu, and there's consumer line level, which is minus 10 dBV. So they can come in a little bit, and that's why on the MixPre you have a little bit of range to adjust the amplification, but generally you shouldn't need to adjust it as much. And the same thing with a wireless system. The idea there is, again, you want to get that gain set on the transmitter pack and leave headroom, and then you can always adjust it in post if you need to, unless you're doing a live show, in which case then you could, you can amplify it to some extent on the MixPre if that's what you're doing, or you can, actually, you were talking about the camera. Yeah, with the camera, again, the idea with the camera is that, hey, this is a line level signal, shouldn't need to change anything. That's just the reality. It would be nice if they had somewhat of a trim in there or somewhat of a gain adjustment, but that's where the more professional devices will have some adjustment. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, Shoji, thanks. Makes sense to view the stereo mix meters and the isolated channel meters to see both gain and fader levels to make sure no clipping is occurring at each mix stage. You got it. That's exactly the purpose of that view. Off topic, what boom pole do you recommend under $200? Whew. How much is the Deity pole? I don't think it's that inexpensive. I think it's more than that. Deity microphones. Boom pole. Okay, so here's the Deity boom pole. I think it's more. Oh, it's 185. There you go. That would be the one I would recommend. That one right there. That's definitely it. And if you wanted to find out the details on that, SoundSpeeds has done a fantastic review of it. And also, we did a live stream about a year ago now, almost exactly a year ago. He joined me on the live stream, and we took a first look at the Deity boom pole. So there you go. All right, Mark, I don't know mixing, but I picked up a demo Behringer XR12 to learn. It makes more sense. Thanks. Yeah, I would highly recommend for those of us that are into audio for video, if you want to improve your skills, go help somebody mix live sound. You will learn so much. That's where I learned more than anything. And in fact, I think a lot of production sound mixers have experience doing live sound reinforcement and working in recording studios on music. my friend Michael Wynn, for example, that's how he did a lot of his. He was in a band, and so he learned all that stuff while he was in the band. It's just that's a great way to learn, to dive deeper than we typically do on the YouTube camera channels out there. So, all right, ding dong. Would you use would you use tentacle on a mirrorless cam or go 3.5 millimeters straight in, run and gun with a mixed pre 6.2 quick turnarounds? For quick turnarounds and I mean, I would need to know more about the production, but especially if it's like seated interviews, I would just go straight into the camera. What I would probably do is I would send the mic. If I had a boom pole sitting over someone, we're doing seated interviews, I would route that to the mixed pre, and then I would route 3.5 millimeter out of the mixed pre into the camera. And if I got everything right, boom, turned around and good to go. Otherwise, the mixed pre 6.2 is sort of my backup. If I do have to go back and do post-processing, then I have that option. But again, I don't know if that's realistic for your scenario, but that's how I would generally approach it for the corporate work that I've done before, which is a lot of sit-down interviews. Okay. All right, what else do you want to know? If you have a question, go ahead and mark it at Curtis Judd Audio in the chat. Danny will bring that up here for us. You can find some stuff. Looks like Robert Harker has some info on Newer's boom pole. Okay, good. All right, we are, by the way, signal chain today. Earthworks Ethos here into the Allen and Heath SQ5. Allen and Heath SQ5 outputs are going directly into the Canon C200 line level, balanced audio, and then that's getting combined with the video into the switcher here. We also have a mic, obviously Danny's mic, which is the Shure KSM8. And then the other mic I had when I was standing up is the Earthworks SR314. So I think you saw me switching between that really when I stood up so that I was a little bit closer. We have a lot of noise in the room because, by the way, SQ5, I don't know if you can hear this. Actually, it sounds like maybe the light fan came on too. But the SQ5 has a fan in it. Plus, I installed the Dante card, which also has a fan. So there are two fans in this thing. And we're probably hearing a bit of that. A little bit. Yeah, I don't have a gate applied today.
Okay.
All right.
Here's another addendum onto that last question.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So if you're moving around, then yeah, I would, unless you have a dedicated sound person, I would just connect the mic directly to camera. Probably. That's how I'd approach it. Possibly wireless if you can. If you need that ability to move around without cables between you. When you say sporting events as well, let me amend my wireless suggestion. If we're talking like high school sports, that could be fine. If we're talking big, huge stadium where they are broadcasting and there's a ton of wireless, there are tens of thousands of people in the stadium, then don't plan on using consumer wireless gear. It's not going to work. By consumer wireless, I mean anything that uses 2.4 gigahertz. Okay. Brian. Have the biggest one-on-one interview of my life coming up. Seated. Have two Sanken COS 11Ds. Have Shure SM7Bs. A Rodecaster Duo. Now what? Overwhelmed. Okay. I would probably just go with the SM7Bs because your Rodecaster Duo has two inputs. So I would make that executive decision ahead of time. I would get those microphones up nice and close to the presenters. Depending on where the camera, I don't know if you're going to have camera. I assume you'll have camera. If so, look to position the microphone so it's not blocking their face from the camera on the on the opposite side. A lot of times miking like this. So if the camera's coming from this side, miking over here on this side is really helpful because that way you can keep it close to them without blocking their face, without getting in the way of the camera. So those are kind of those are my initial thoughts there. Also, test. Get friends, family, do a test setup, get everything dialed in and say, okay, I'm confident. I know that my gear is working. I know that I can get a good recording. Then also I would make a checklist for yourself. When you do that test recording, write down on a checklist all of the pieces of gear that you needed, so that when you go to pack up, if it's not something at your home, when you go to pack up, you get to the venue and then you go, oh no, I forgot the cables or something like that. I did have one of my first jobs when I was working on a short film. It was I was doing it for free. I got there and I realized I didn't have the kit for concealing and hiding lavalier microphones. So I have a kit of, moleskin and all these stickies and things like that. Totally forgot to bring it with me. And that's because I didn't have a checklist and I didn't check ahead of time. So checklists will reduce risk a ton. So if it's good enough for pilots before they fly, it's good enough for a production sound mixer before they take off to their next job. So those are my pieces of advice. That will help you feel much less overwhelmed and much more confident getting into the car or getting into whatever transportation you're taking, heading over. You'll know, okay, I've tested, I know this will work, I've got everything I need, and then you can just, get there plenty of, as well in advance as you can to get everything set up. You want to have that set up before the interviewee and the interviewer are there in as much as possible as well, so that also puts them in a position where they're confident and they're not distracted by you running around trying to get things working. Okay. All right, Mike, once again supported a big hybrid meeting this week with my Mackie soundboard going out to a PA for live sound and to the XLR1 on the Lumix S5 II for those online. Very nice. And Mike, it sounds like you've got that dialed in because you've done that a number of times now. And yeah, that I think hopefully all those things that we talked about kind of mesh with your experience as well, similar to what you've found. All right, Christopher says the Gen 3 Dante cards for Allen and Heath have much quieter fans than the prior gens. I don't remember if mine's 2 or 3, second or third gen. Can't remember. It's not ridiculously loud. It's just more noise than we have in this space normally. All right, Curtis, I saw a lot of Allen and Heath SQ7s. They're a great way to get into digital audio. They have great preamps and good processing power. I really like the SQ5. So the SQ7 is just the bigger version, I assume. Audio Buff, you're talking about selling them for installed situations, primarily for House of Worship. The SQ5 is a little, obviously smaller, fewer channels, but has all the power that I need, certainly. Probably way more than I need, actually, for the things I do. But yeah, it's a fantastic little mixer. Yonti, I used a wireless Go plus 4060 at mic level on a Blackmagic Design Pocket. Now with a rented line level wireless setup, the quality is much better. More headroom, no noise like a cassette tape. Yeah. I think there may be a couple of things going on there. The wireless Go, I know the Wireless Pro provides plug-in power up to 5 volts. I'm not sure whether the original Wireless Go did or the Wireless Go 2. And a lot of the pro level lav mics, in my experience, need that 5 volts. Maybe that affects the noise performance. I don't know, or maybe it's just the wireless system itself. I'm not sure, but glad to hear that the rented line level wireless setup worked well for you. Thoughts on the Sennheiser ME64. It's my favorite cam mic, super light, ultra quiet floor, great for quick handheld interviews on the go. My thinking is, if you love it, I love it too. I mean, I love it. I love it for you. I think that's great. If you're getting the results you want, then fantastic. I believe, if I remember right, the ME64 has been discontinued, unfortunately. It was a modular system where you could attach different microphone capsules, but you could get a shotgun style capsule. But yeah, I've used it before. It's a little bit brighter sounding than other mics. Sometimes you want that. So if it's good, it's good. It sounds good, it is good. Brian, thank you. Thank you so much for the super chat, and I wish you the very best on your interview. Can't wait to hear it. If you could send a link, share a link, or maybe come back after your experience. We'd love to hear about it and how things went. All right, Rag and Bone Puppet Theater. Any ideas on sound treatment for a podcast when the script changes from narration to dialogue? close mic sounds good for narration, but odd for dialogue. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't know the space that you're treating, but at the very least, acoustic blankets. And there's all this. There are videos on YouTube of people saying, like, is an acoustic blanket really that much better than a moving blanket from Home Depot? And maybe it depends on which sound blanket you use, but I use the Producer's Choice sound blankets, which you can get over at vocalbooth2go.com. They've actually rated them in terms of their noise reduction coefficient, and they are heavy. They are big and heavy, and that seems to work pretty well. So if the only thing you could do is something temporary like a sound blanket, I think a sound blanket would be probably the first thing I would look at, because they're big, so you can treat a fairly large space, and you can pick up 3 or 4 of them and actually get yourself in a pretty good spot where you can actually have the voice actors moving back from the microphone a little bit more to get that more natural sound that sounds a little bit more like dialogue as opposed to narration. So I assume you mean by narration a sort of a voiceover, voice of God kind of thing, and then the actual dialogue would be the characters in the play. Robert, yes, for checklists. Last year I forgot to use mine and forgot my A-cam monopole. Used a light stand in a pinch. First shoot of the season. Yes. Checklists, people. Checklists. Use them. Again, if it's good enough for a pilot. Christopher, if it's good enough for an airline pilot, it's good enough for a production sound mixer. And Christopher confirms I have the Gen 3. Thank you, Christopher. It's not horrible, don't get me wrong, but it's relatively close to the mics in a small room. So, is there a way to access your streaming course without email? No.
They got hacked.
Oh, if I log in with email, I spread many risks. You can email me and we can work something out. We'll find a solution. Okay, Matt says, yes, it little, because it digital. Most of all my work was 64 channel on an analog board, so you need long arms. Yep, that's true. On an analog board, you don't have the ability to switch between banks, and so they have to put all the channels there on the board itself. 64 channels is a very wide board. You got to have a very large wingspan to be able to reach all of that. Mike says, I did forget to set the PA input to line level and couldn't understand why it was clipping for about a minute. But it sounds like you figured it out. You're getting better by the day. We're all getting better by the day. Thanks for sharing, Mike. Christopher says, MIT research supposedly has a new silk-like thickness sound absorption material, much lighter than regular sound blankets. No idea when it will come to market. Yes. There are a few technologies. There's one, I don't know if this is the same one. By silk-like thickness, I assume you mean basically like a sheet, like a bed sheet. I did read an article on some research that's being done on a material that, in essence, electronically responds. It's very, very thin material, but electronically responds to the sound waves as it's hitting the surface, and essentially absorbing it in some fashion, or creating a constructive interference so that it doesn't keep bouncing around. So yeah, there's some interesting research going on as far as I know. I'm with you. We'll see if it comes to market. It sounds like some of that stuff would be very expensive. Okay, 2-part here from Sheriff Logs. Have you ever experienced if you buy cheap, you buy twice, where you bought a product forcing you to buy more of it, costing you more money in the long run? An example would be a 3.5 millimeter cable or micro HDMI breaking. Yeah, I think a lot of times, too, that applies to wireless systems. Their first wireless system is often one of the 2.4 gigahertz wireless systems nowadays, and they get really frustrated with them. And they find that the noise performance isn't quite what they expected. The range isn't necessarily what they expected. Although I will say they're doing pretty well with those 2.4 gigahertz systems. If you're working in a place where there's not a lot of other RF activity in 2.4 gigahertz range, they can go almost as far as some of the better UHF systems, believe it or not, if they're within line of sight. The UHF systems seem to do a little bit better when they're not directly in line of sight. So UHF is still superior. But yeah, there's a lot of, well, microphone cables, perfect example. Go buy an XLR cable from Amazon Basics, put it near an AC power adapter, and tell me what your experience is like. Tell me what you hear. You're going to hear a lot of hum on that. So if you buy a Canary Star Quad cable and you spend probably 4 times the amount of money, and it happens that the cable ends up running by an AC power adapter, you're probably never going to know it because you're not going to hear any hum. So that's another example there. Okay, Robert, moving blankets are measured in weight per dozen. Moving blankets are 30 pounds per dozen, 60 pounds per dozen. Sound blankets are typically 90 pounds per dozen. Some are 120 pounds per dozen. That's a perfect example. I think, too, with the sound blankets, 60 pounds per dozen is medium. Harbor Freight has 6 pounds per dozen. Grommeted sound blankets are 60 pounds per dozen. It also has to do with the material that they use, too. Sometimes, like, for example, a moving blanket, the purpose of a moving blanket is to keep your furniture from getting scratched when you are moving it and putting it on a truck. Sound blankets, if they're actually designed to be sound blankets, are designed to absorb as much sound as possible to keep it from reflecting back and to manage reverb to a large extent. So it's kind of a different thing. But thanks for the details there on that. If I email you for the moment you get hacked, there is something in the hacker system that reacts to my email. They fake my mobile phone. Oh no, I'm so sorry, DaVinci Girl.
Don't email you.
Yeah, please don't email then. I'm so sorry. I hope that you're able to work that out soon. Kevin, I went on a feature shoot and remembered all my gear but forgot my hiking shoes. The shoot was out in a dense forest. I should have used a checklist. Yes, I'm with you. I actually, I once had to hike. They were going to do a static interview for a kind of a human interest piece type of thing that was funded by REI, the outdoor equipment company. And I didn't realize we hiked almost a mile back into the forest, and it was fine. It was a path, and I was prepared for that. But what I wasn't prepared to do was know that the interview was going to be about 15, 20 minutes long. So I was like, yeah, I'm not going to bring the C-stand on that. I'm not going to hike a mile with a C-stand. And so instead I had to boom for 17 minutes straight, which was interesting. It worked out. My arms were a little shaky at the end, but we made it through. Okay. Christopher, cables like Mogami, while also well-made compared to the cheap stuff, also have lifetime, no questions asked warranties and actually honor them. That's another great example, Christopher. And that, for example, is there's at the risk of opening a can of worms, there's always this debate between Zoom F8N Pro recorders and MixPre recorders. And people look at the prices and they're like, why is the MixPre so much more expensive? I can get the same thing capability-wise from the Zoom. The thing with Zoom is they don't have any repair facilities. If your Zoom F8N Pro goes bad after it's out of the warranty period, I don't think there's any recourse whatsoever. You can't even pay to have it repaired because they don't have repair facilities. So, whereas with sound devices, you can send that in. It may be expensive, but they can repair it. So, there's another example. Okay, so no emails except from Tokan Daniela, please. I inform you all when it is all okay. Okay, thank you. And again, best wishes on a resolution there.
I think this means cheap microphones.
How about microphones? Well, Mark, you have a story to tell about that, I believe. If you shop, for example, for a Sennheiser MKH416, and they're $999 at almost every retailer except for that one on eBay, you might not want to buy the one on eBay because it could be a fake. It could be a counterfeit. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as well. If it seems too good to be true, it may well be too good to be true. So be really careful. I would buy, if you're going to make an investment in a piece of gear that you're going to rely on for your work as either, even if it's a side hustle, buy it from an authorized dealer is my advice. Hi, is there any problem with leaving the F6 battery list for too long? The only thing you'll notice, Mr. Hammett, is that if you take the battery off, when you power it up next time, it will make you set the date and time again. But it doesn't damage the unit. It just, there's a little rechargeable battery inside so that if you don't turn it on at least once a week or every few days, it doesn't keep that internal battery charged, and that internal battery keeps the time, the date and the time clock updated. So if you don't power it on for a period of time, the only real downside is you're going to have to reset the date and time when you power it back up the next time. So no, not a big deal, but it shouldn't hurt it. Okie dokie. I think we got everything covered for today. I am, again, super grateful for everybody who came here today, who's part of our little community for making the world sound better. Get out there, make some great sound this week, and we'll talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.